Back home for a little bit. I'm in my poultry barn. I got half the roof on. I do a lot of straightening, and now I got to straighten the other half a little bit. It's just a simple piece construction. Got treated posts in the ground to support, and it's going to work out just right. But I need to get this done as early as I can because September's going to be coming up quick, August, and then the pressure really starts coming down on me to get stuff done and ready to go, so I can go do what I do up north for a long periods of time. Anyway, so was it Monday right now? I'm hoping I'm going to be speaking to the kind ladies who were seeking me out a few days ago. I'm going to contact them today and see about possibly meeting up. I think I can do it maybe day after tomorrow or a little bit after that. And then also I'm going to look into meeting up with the other man who basically grew up in the wilds as a natural person in the real world. Man, I want to talk to that guy too. And hopefully I can get into more of talking to real people on here instead of just me and my ugly mug and annoying voice, right? What else? So much to share. Feel beat up. Every time I come back from the coast, you just feel like you've been through a football game because you're up on your feet the whole time getting beat up in the boat, right? With the waves. But, oh yeah. So one thing that you all have followed this channel, my other channel, or whatever, I followed what I do and share with everybody, is it's no surprise that I have a camera beside me, usually 3 or 4 at all times. I don't leave the house without a camera. Ever. And that's why I managed to catch so much wildlife on video. Or whatever. I'll just find cool shit and I'll nail it with the camera. And I always have it with me. And unfortunately, I always say unfortunately, because so far for me, seeing one of these unknown beings in the forest, in the woods, hasn't been a fortunate experience. It's rarely this fortunate that you have that experience. I know there's going to be a whole pile of people going, "What, are you kidding? It's the best thing that ever happened to me." Well, it hasn't been the best thing that happened to me, really, when you think about it, because it has shown me that everything is basically a joke when it comes to man-made. And man-organized and man-controlled is an absolute lie, and it's misleading and it's a joke. And so when you're fiercely independent like I am, it makes it very frustrating for a personality of mine. It just does. Because you do not, first off, you do not have any part of you that can be or wants to be controlled. There isn't one part of you that accepts being told what to do from anybody. And that can be very frustrating when you realize that the journey that we have been directed to go on is not the right one. And it's very, very hard for one person to stop it and correct it. And it's very, very hard to get the people who have been programmed to wake up and smell the coffee, right? So that's why I say it's somewhat unfortunate sometimes when you have the real, true facts slapped in your face out of the blue, and then your mind starts going and it doesn't stop. And here we are today, right? But anyway, I'm babbling. Same old shit. Couple coffees first thing in the morning. And I'm probably not making sense, but oh well. I will probably later by the end of the day. But anyway, get back to the camera thing. So when I'm on the coast, as you've seen, I always have the cameras on the dash of the boat behind, all mixed up with all my other shit, sunglasses and wires and charger cables behind the depth sounder and all the other jazz. But I have it there. And I'll be in the stern of the boat working the gear, getting bounced around, and I'm non-stop watching the coast. You can't help it. When you're driving down a country road, you can't help it. When you're driving down a highway in British Columbia, you can't help it. Dark spots, dark blobs, images that are somewhat possibly the shape of something in the distance catch your attention. There's nothing you can do to stop it. It catches your attention. You're non-stop looking out for it. And every single one of you that's a member of the Club of No Return knows exactly what I'm talking about. Once you have this reality of what's going on slapped in your face, you'll never shake it. You don't really not think about it for very too long periods of time. And every single time you go near the forest, you think about it, and there's nothing you can do about it. But But anyway, I always have a video camera on hand, and I'm always looking for wildlife. I'm always looking for bears. I'm looking for everything. But unfortunately, in the back of my mind, I'm always looking for that one particular shape as well. Probably for self-protection, right? Survival. I don't know, whatever you call it. It's just, you just do. So here's an example. So this one particular spot, and I videotaped it the next day in broad daylight, but lots of the times it's way off in the distance. I'll see something, I'm like, oh, what's that? And I'm in the middle of doing something, either getting the gear down or whatever, steering the boat. And I go, oh, what's that? And then I gotta stop what I'm doing, secure what I'm doing, put a rod down, run to the dash, get the camera. By the time I get the video camera up, if it's close to the timber or not, sometimes I catch it, sometimes I don't. And I glanced, and it was somewhat foggy and shitty out and raining, and I glanced towards the shoreline and seen something big. Like, I'm always seeing bears on these beaches. You know what a bear size shape is, but this thing looked pretty big. And instantly I'm thinking, oh my god, that's a big bear. But I don't waste any time. Oh, there's something. I gotta stand there and stare at it and waste time looking, because I need that time to go get my camera so I can videotape it. And I got my camera, and by the time I got the camera zoomed in and hit record, I just caught it going into the timber. Now, what I'm sharing, why I'm sharing this as well, is it's a classic example of possibly how other people would try to capitalize off something like this and say, oh, we got a Sasquatch, look at it, it's a Sasquatch, right? For me, this image is 99.9% a monstrous, huge black bear. Did I see it clearly as a black bear when I first saw it? No. I just saw something huge in black moving at the timberline going to the timber, and I barely just got enough time. Glance, oh, holy shit, go to the camera. So that's how long I look at it, get the camera, zoom in, hit record. But the weird thing about this video clip is, whether it's distorted or not, I don't know. Who knows? I don't really care, but it's interesting to share with all of you. It looks like it rises up on 2 feet when it gets behind the tree and walks off. Right? Check it out. Doesn't it? If it does, whatever. If it doesn't, whatever. If it's a big, huge, massive black bear, whatever. If it is an upright, hairy being that hasn't been recognized by the mainstream population, whatever. Right? It's just another video clip. But I thought I would show this to you all, to show you just how easy it possibly is for somebody to be running around with a video camera, recording everything and anything, and then calling everything a frickin' Sasquatch. Am I calling this a Sasquatch? No. Am I calling it a black bear? More than likely. Did I see its legs and ears and head and snout? No. Did I? What I'm showing you is what I saw. Quick glance, seen something huge and dark, go to the camera, zoom in, hit record, and this is what I got. So there you go. You're seeing what I'm seeing. But you gotta agree though, in the tail end, it sure looks like something rising up and walking away. You almost see the right arm swinging back. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. In the end, it doesn't really matter, right? It doesn't really matter in the end what this video shows. And that's very easily proven. I just shared it with you guys, and that's as far as it's gonna go. It's just another video. But anyway, let me get some emails shared with all of you. And I'm going to, I don't know, Actually, I gotta stop babbling. That's what I gotta do. I gotta just share with you guys. Now, let's listen to this, getting to the top of my list. And I've just numbered 1 through 5 random emails who are waiting in line to be read. So, now I mark them as read as I read them. Northern California firefighter experienced the title of this email. Hey Steve, get right to it. My name is Jim Clausen. Use it. I'm not afraid of anyone or entity at this point. I'm 55 years old, and this all happened in 1988. I graduated with a degree in forest management and immediately got a job with the USFS on the Mendocino National Forest. Timber sale layout and prep it first. Then the northern spotted owl bullshit stopped it all. Transferred to the Wildland Fire Division and found a place on the hotshot crew. Early season projects had us doing things like brush disposal or timber stand improvement chores while we waited for a fire to bust somewhere. I was always willing to work for some OT, and the Wilderness Trail crew needed some bodies. The Yola-Boley Wilderness area, about the northern edge of the Mendo and southern edge of the Shasta/Trinity NF. Pretty remote, coastal range mountains, with red and white fir at the higher altitudes. Over winter, the wind and snow load creates a bunch of deadfall over the trails. Make sure that's recording. Myself and 2 of the trail crew headed out for a 3-day clearing trip with old school crosscut saws. No engines allowed in the wilderness areas in the U.S. to open up the main trail in. The Mendo is a pretty dry forest, meaning few weeks and only a couple of large drainages. So all the small natural springs are destination points for animals and people alike. Our first night's camp destination was an area known as the Frying Pan, good running spring and a small pond that filled it. It had been a long day. We covered some miles and my boots were really giving me fits. I had just purchased a pair of White's smoke jumpers, the best by the way, and was breaking them in. We made a small camp near the pond and set up our little bivouac tents, ate some backpacking BS food and crashed out. Not sure exactly the time, but it was in the wee hours. Heavy footfalls past my tent, heavy enough to wake me, made the ground shudder. As I worked through the sleep fog, I thought a bear, but quickly realizing the few black bears in the area could not move the ground like that, and that whatever was out there was walking on 2 feet. I suddenly felt dread and danger, anxiety, all at once. Stuck in my bag in this overlapping tent, I was paralyzed. It moved past towards the pond, and after a few moments returned toward the tent. Then nothing. Silence. I then got a feeling of calm, and in my head heard, "Do not be alarmed." I felt incredibly sleepy at once, and as I drifted off, I heard in my head, "The mice will chew them for the salt." I didn't wake again until dawn, still a little confused, and crawled out of my tiny tent. My new boots were there, moved a bit, and minus the laces. Leather laces that came with the White's boots. I looked around and saw them hanging in the fur by my tent. To be clear, these were leather laces from a pair of 12-inch top firefighting boots. I was the first one up, and nothing else looked disturbed in our little area, but the tracks near my tent and the pond were huge. 16 to 17-inch, barefoot and toed. None of my company reported hearing a thing when we spoke, and had no clue about the laces. We did, however, document the tracks photographically, still have the pics. But remember, this is the 80s, so old school film/negatives. I was amazed at the response once we came out of the wilderness area and I spoke to my immediate supervisor, taken aside and told, "Say nothing about this to anyone else." But I know, and so do some folks up the line taken aside and told, "Say nothing about this to anyone else." But I know, and so do some folks up the line that do not want you talking. End quote. Shut my mouth with the Forest Service people, but the local timber fallers and skidder operators I'd run into would, with a few beers and knowing I had no chip in the game, tell me about critters they had seen on the northern Mendocino. Felt good to know I wasn't alone. I also felt effed up that my bosses and ultimately the feds were denying this shit. So, to make a long email a little shorter, the U.S. federal government has been more than aware of the savage existence and squelching info as best they can for decades, if not longer. Mind speak happens. Intelligent hominids, definitely. Government suppression, absolutely. Another encounter in Idaho, but I'll send that another time. I think I've run long enough on this little one. Go get some Steelies and tell Sarah her recipes rock. Jim Clausen. Jim, absolutely appreciate your email, man. And next time, please, if you want to share one with me, share them all in the same email. Okay? Like, I think it was just the other day I read one that was from 2020. It's like, oh my God, they're stacked up. There's so many. What do we say on that one? One thing, we had another smoke jumper firefighter email before, something about the Mount St. Helens episode, and that these beings are actually quite appreciative of the men and women that fight those fires. So I wonder if that has something to do with the kindness about saving your laces. Maybe might have something to do with it, right? And as far as see, I have an absolute, personally have a shit-eating attitude with any type of authority at all when it comes to me in my life and what I do and what I speak, what I think. And if I had somebody tell me not to say anything, you know what I'd say to them? Ram it up your ass. You're nothing. The people are something, and I'm telling everybody, go F yourself. Right? But that's just me. Does the government know about this? Absolutely. Of course they do. And why? One thing for certain of why they do not want you, the people, to know the truths. What's the saying? The real, if the population will not be able to wrap their head around the honest truth. Our honest truth is just way too much, and I believe that is true, without a doubt. And for the tidbits that I take in from people who are far more intelligent than I am, and as well connected, both professionally, governmentally, whatever you want to call it. I had conversations with a very, very intelligent man, 5 different careers in the U.S. government, told me flat out that he was told sternly, the government does not care about anything at all except control of the labor to appease the entity, and that's it. And that sentence troubled him for most of his professional career and still does today, I believe. I got to get back to that guy. And that statement has as well been crystal clear in the back of my head, because if you listen to that statement and then look around at the shit show going on, it makes sense in a way, although the answer's not clear. But when you think about it, it's true. If you look at the environment, you look at the state of mental health in the people, you look at what they pump out to the people, the control, the misleading, they do not care about absolutely anyone or anything except, quote, control of the labor, end quote. Right? And then there's to appease the entity part. Now, who or what is the entity? That's the big question. But anyways, getting back to why people like the kind man who just shared us was told to keep your mouth shut. I am very convinced at this point that control of the labor. That's why. That's why we have information kept from us. That's why we are controlled, told, and directed. It is for control of the labor. Without a doubt. They don't give a shit. The government doesn't give a shit about us. The government does not give a shit about this planet, the environment. The government does not give a shit about anything. It's true. So that's why we're all here together in this one great big group. We're all sitting in the same nest trying to figure out what's really going on. Right? We're getting there. It's a hell of a task to take on. It's very time consuming. But I'm into it. I can't stand losing. I can't stand losing to the bad. I can't stand losing against myself, not other people. I'm never in competition with anybody for anything, but I can't stand losing to myself, and I can't stand losing to the bad side. I've lost a lot to the bad side over the years, which I've threatened to share a few times in the past, but maybe one day, not today. So that's why I'm here. I don't quit. I don't quit. And we're not going to quit. And we're going to make sure every single person's heard. We're going to expose dirty, filthy pricks when we can. And we're going to get to the bottom of this shit show. We're going to find out our truth and the truths of what's really going on. Now, enough babbling. Coffee's doing me good. This is titled An Old Family Story from the Philippines. Dear Steve, I think I started watching your How to Hunt channel in 2018 before it came The Facts. I'm an extremely green, excuse me, but passionate hunter. I've only ever hunted twice, and only in North America, and I'm a 42-year-old Filipino in the Philippines. Please don't share my name. I got you, man. My country's a small place, and modernized people here in my country will not understand, and I don't want to deal with the grief. I've always been interested in this topic, and take your position that if there are tens of thousands of eyewitness accounts and experiences, then there is truth in all of this. Plain and simple. No doubt. One of my best friends, who's half Dutch and grew up in Canada, has also seen one of these beings step out onto the road, nearly hitting it. Let me give you a brief background. Filipino folklore speaks of a giant man-like monster of the jungles and remote places called Kapre, K-A-P-R-E. There are other names for it depending on the dialect, but the other common name here in the Philippines is Agta, A-G-T-A. similar to what people report in North America and in numerous parts of the world. These creatures are man-like, covered in hair, are said to have spiritual characteristics and abilities, emit a powerful odor likened to fish sauce when they are around, dwell among dense jungle or forests, are said to be as tall as a bygone era telephone or power line poles, 8 to 10 feet tall. They are generally feared, and most people here consider them to have human-like traits. They are even said to smoke tobacco, and there are still a good number of people here living outside of cities who believe in their existence. My mother was diagnosed several years ago with Alzheimer's. The story I'm about to share was passed on to me by her and is about her father's experience. I never really got to know my maternal grandfather, as he passed away when I was barely a year old. He was a war hero during World War II, as he worked for U.S. Army intelligence reporting Japanese troop positions and encampment details by infiltrating their camps and bases as a mechanic. At one point, the Japanese made him a wanted man and offered a substantial reward for information leading to his capture. Right on, man. Good for him. My grandfather eluded them throughout the war, and when he had passed, my grandmother was given an American flag for his services rendered during the war. I decided to email you because after having been an avid follower of the channel and having listened to many of your viewers' stories, with special mention to what the Owl Man and others have shared similarly, I thought this may be of some help. Just to also mention right off the bat, this story has some implications for people who may have, or at least believe, in psychic abilities and special people having the ability to see what others can't. My grandfather was one of these people who were born with their third eye open. To quote the famous movie line, he could see dead people. My grandfather's story takes place in a rural part of the Visayan Islands, Visayan Islands, in the southern Philippines in the early 20s. My grandfather was in his early teens when this happened. As my mother had told it to me, my grandfather was living with his father and other family at the time in a very rural province. They lived outside the closest town among the farmlands and plantations. He and his family lived walking distance from the town, though I believe people walked a lot more back then, so I can't say for sure how close or how far they were from the actual town. It was summer. They got word that a cousin of his would be spending the summer with them. As the story goes, this was a very close cousin of my grandfather, so he was very happy with the news. When his cousin arrived, they began to spend the summer enjoying what young teen boys usually enjoy. They did a lot of swimming at the nearby beach, exploring the surrounding areas, and going in and out of town to enjoy whatever the town had to offer. Hearing other stories about my grandfather, they probably chased girls too. On the day that this experience took place, they were in town. They had to decide to head back home in late afternoon after spending some time there. This is a rural part of the Visayan Islands in the 20s. So the main road is basically a well-graded, dusty dirt road that had no lighting of any kind. My mother says that this is why they'd leave town at a certain time, because they didn't want to get caught out walking home in the dark and to make sure they made it home in time for dinner. They began their walk home. After having walked a good distance, they were well outside of the town and among rural farmlands and plantations. Imagine a lone dirt road and fruit tree plantations and agricultural fields on either side of the road. They were in the middle of nowhere. As they were walking, it is said that my grandfather began to behave strangely and started acting aloof towards his cousin. He told his cousin not to touch him and to keep a distance, and moved several feet away from his cousin. His cousin, thinking he was playing around, grabbed my grandfather in a bear hug type motion, and my grandfather's dismay and horror. As the story goes, once his cousin had touched my grandfather, he was able to then instantly hear an intimidating loud voice directed right at them. As the cousin looked ahead to where the voice was coming from, up ahead and to their left, he saw what was described in family stories as a large, dark-haired capre. It was described to be as tall as a power line post, 8 to 10 feet tall, and was making fun of them and hurling insults and threats at them in the local Visayan dialect as they were walking along the road. My grandfather quickly grabbed his cousin, pulled his head in, making it look like a playful gesture, pulled his cousin's head close to his face and whispered, "Pretend not to hear it. Pretend it's not there. If it knows we see him, he might follow us home." My grandfather's cousin was in shock and was barely able to cope with what was happening, so my grandfather had to keep dragging his cousin and carrying on a conversation out loud in as normal a manner as possible to keep the capre from suspecting that he had been seen and heard. It is said that his cousin wet himself. They were able to get far enough without rousing the capre's suspicion because, as the story goes, it did not move away from where it was, and it did not follow them. When my grandfather and his cousin were far enough from where this all took place, his cousin mustered enough composure and asked him what had just happened. My grandfather then began to explain to him what it was, and that it was a capre, and that they would on occasion emerge from the dense mountains or jungle forests and take fruit and other food from the plantations. They could choose to not be seen, but that he'd seen them anyway, as he saw everything, having an open third eye. He also explained that this was why he distanced himself. He told his cousin that if he was touching anyone, that person could see or hear what he was seeing and hearing too. Holy shit, is that interesting. He told his cousin that they didn't like people, and that if they knew that he knew about them, that they would harass you by coming to take... Sounds like something might be killing the chickens again. Sorry. They would harass you by coming to take food off your property and perhaps throw things on your roof to scare you at night. How familiar is that? So it was always best to ignore them and pretend that you didn't know that they were there. When they got home, the family could see that his cousin was visibly shaken, and they told everyone the whole story. This was 1920s rural Philippines, Steve. Alright, I gotta go find out what's killing the chickens. I'll be back in a minute. Alright. Got the knuckleheads all calmed down. It's a bird of prey ripping around, whatever. So it was always best to ignore them and pretend that you didn't know that they were there. When they got home, the family could see that his cousin was visibly shaken, and they told everyone the whole story. This is 1920s rural Philippines, Steve. They were believed and warned they would be best to come home earlier in the succeeding days due to the incident. Steve has shared this family story of mine for those who may have been born with the same gifts or abilities as my grandfather. God rest his soul. Scott Carpenter, the Owl Man, and those whose stories you've shared talk about cloaking, or the Sabe's ability to not be seen. There's a very good chance that people with psychic ability or an open third eye can see them no matter how much they try to conceal themselves using their abilities. This may be helpful for someone out there watching. Furthermore, I'd like to point out that it was speaking their local dialect. Speech? Sounds like an intelligent human trait. Learning a lot from your channel, there are those that have wrote in that say that if you can speak a Native American language, that the Sabe will understand you. There are way too many parallels and similarities. Upon further research, I've learned that Vietnam has their own version of the Sabe, as well, called the Batutu. It seems that they are indeed all over the planet. Today the capre has been dismissed as folklore and explained away through various historical interpretations as a local corruption of the Islamic word kafir, K-A-F-F-I-R, which referred to slaves brought to work Spanish plantations during the colonial times. Though many people throughout my country believe differently and, like my grandfather passed, have seen these things or have been harassed by them. In fact, my own wife swears that while she was living in a province near northern Luzon, L-U-Z-O-N, as a younger woman, she swears she smelled that strange and strong fish sauce odor emanating from a property behind where they live that was full of mango and other fruit trees and had no lights of any kind to illuminate the property, and that the property would sometimes make people feel strange or creeped out. She even claims that once she saw what she says may have been glinting eyes at tree branch level and the glow of lit tobacco. Thanks for all you do, Steve. Take care. God bless you. Hope someone can benefit from this. Your most likely lone viewer from the Philippines. Okay, man. Appreciate it. And I'll bet you're not the only one. Wherever these beings are seen from people, unless it absolutely terrifies you into withdrawing from everything and pretending you didn't even see it, most people seek out information nonstop. And if your family knows of these things, many others do. And I would bet, what's it called? Dimes to donuts? Dollars to donuts that somebody else in the Philippines has seen as well. Without a doubt, and I would not be surprised if they're here watching. But anyway, thank you so much for sending that. I'm super happy that you were fortunate enough to experience hunting in North America. It's something else, isn't it? It's something else. It's tough to explain it to someone who hasn't seen it or felt it or experienced it, right? The mountains, man. The mountains and the forest here is something else. But anyway, there you go. Another one from around the planet. Similar description to a T, and the third eye being mentioned yet again. I don't think anybody should scoff at the third eye mentioned from people. The perineal gland? Anyway, thanks again, man. I appreciate your time you just took to share with everybody through me. And let me get on with another one. Somebody from the Philippines is watching. Somebody besides yourself, I'll guarantee it. My Bigfoot story in 2010. At 10 p.m. at night, it was in the winter time and an inch of snow on the ground. It was the start of winter. My name is Kevin. I live in Lower Michigan, USA. I was at my sister's house. I went over there to visit my sister in June. She lives in the country, 3 miles out of town. My girlfriend dropped me off over there and was going to pick me back up, but I decided to walk back to town and get a 3-mile walk in, as I was going to stop at the bar for one quick beer before I went back to my place in town. I was wearing black jeans, a black shirt, and a leather black biker jacket. So I started walking down the road. No cars were out that night. The moon was out, about half moon, so I could see somewhat good. I walked 1 mile, then had to turn left on this road for another mile. About half the mile down this road, there was a railroad track, and it's kind of in a valley. The railroad track is where it all started. A couple typos, you guys. I heard this big limb break right beside me on the tree line beside the road. This tree was really big. It looked like a big hickory tree. I said out loud, "Damn, I thought maybe the snow and ice broke a limb out of the tree," but this tree limb that broke was really loud. But I just kept walking, and I started to hear heavy footfalls behind me. Like I said, the trees that went along the roads were heavy tree line. I looked back but didn't see nothing. I kept walking back, got to the next road, then turned right all the time, hearing heavy footfalls behind me. Now I was 1 mile to the town city limits. This is where it gets kind of weird. I can still hear the heavy footfall, and now I look back and I see the biggest Bigfoot I'd ever seen before. How many times before did you see him? It was on the left side of the road, so it must have crossed over the road from when I took that last right turn in the fence row or a tree line. It was coming right at me. Walking, this thing was. Okay, there's typos all over. It was 12 feet or taller. 4 to 5 feet wide, really long arms, big legs. Its muscles in its upper arms were really big, like 30 inches or bigger, around, just popping. I would guess he weighed 1,200 pounds. He was all ripped, all muscles. I yelled out loud. I have a knife in my jacket, and I told it to stop and don't come any closer. I only had a 3-inch knife at this point. It was about 20 feet from me, but I knew if I pulled my knife, it would just piss it off. It walked right up on the road where I was, about 5 feet from me, and it stopped. I was looking up at its face. My head came to where its belly was, and I'm 6 feet, weigh 230 pounds. I looked like a kid to this thing. I told it I was going to town and pointed to town. It said something I couldn't understand, like some kind of language I didn't understand. And it nodded its head like saying, yes, I could pass through here and go to town. It turns around, starts walking back the way it came. I turned around, started to head to town, and looked back one more time, and this beast is gone. In only a few blinks of an eye, I thought I was going to die that night. But even as big as this Bigfoot was, I would have tried to fight it if I had to, but I knew this thing would have knocked my head off with one swipe of its hand. His arms were twice as long as mine. Description: he had all black hair, 12 feet tall, 1,200 pounds, 4 to 5 feet wide shoulders, big arms, 30 inches around, muscles and arms. His face didn't look as bad as many pics I've seen of Bigfoot on the internet. Pics more of a human-like, but half ape, like, if you know what I mean. You could tell this Bigfoot had brains, and me and it had eye-to-eye contact when speaking. I know there are bad and good Bigfoots. I'm just glad I met a good one. I don't know why he followed me. Maybe he was young when near the railroad tracks. I don't know. But I know he came out of that tree. I know he came out of that tree and must have broke that limb coming out of that tree. I did make it to town, and by the time I got there, the bar was closed, and I definitely needed a drink after that, but I did have one when I made it home. This is my other encounter. I sent you one before this one. My name is Kevin from Lower Michigan. You can share my name. Thanks for all you do. I hope all the info I send you helps to understand the Bigfoot people. And thanks for sharing. Kevin Fry. Alright, Kevin. Thanks for that email, man. It was a little rough to read that one, but holy shit. 5 feet away, and then you kept your composure. It's funny how some people react, right? Everybody reacts different. I've had big, ripped, A-type men who would probably squash me in a second. Turned into stiff, frozen, terrified little children when it came to grizzly bear charges or encounters. And then all of a sudden, you know, you'll have other people. I've had a 16-year-old kid at 30-06, got him first time ever in British Columbia. The only thing he'd ever shot for was a spiked deer, and I got this massive monster bull moose charging in, and the kid didn't even flicker for a second. You know, there's all sorts of people. Everybody reacts differently when shit goes down. I think everybody possibly reacts. Maybe it's a chemical reaction to adrenaline. I don't know. But a lot of people react, and a lot of people freeze, and a lot of people forget instantly what went down and block their other memory. Right? It's funny how everybody reacts differently. So that's something else to hear that you reacted that smoothly, 5 feet away from something so intimidating. Jesus. I think most people would have just fell apart and crumpled down on the ground and curled up in a ball and whimpered in the fetal position, right? Another one that makes you go, what the hell? Michigan again. Dozens and dozens from Michigan. Alright. Here's another one titled Bedford Point. Hello, Steve. Back in the early 1990s, I wanted to go hiking up in the Cascade Mountains, southeast of Estacada, Oregon. The area I wanted to hike was an old skid road that went for a couple of miles behind a locked timber company's gate. The sign on the gate said, "Welcome to walk and visit." It was in late February of, I think, 92 or 93. It had been snowing, and there was 10 inches of snow on the old skid road. I parked my rig just above the gate and walked over and threw the sight around the gate. I was carrying a hunting rifle and a day pack, and it was 20 degrees outside, and I was dressed for the winter. Passing through the lumber company's gate, the skid road went downhill for a quarter mile and then through Bee Creek. B-E-E Creek. At the bottom, the snow was undisturbed. No one had been in there lately, and probably not since last fall's hunting season. My first thought was, who was in here jogging in 10 inches of snow? Then I saw the size of the tracks. When I crossed Bee Creek, there in front of me at the bottom of the 10-inch deep snow were these 18-inch 5-toed prints. I looked to my left, uphill into the Bee Creek drainage, and saw where these tracks had come downhill alongside the creek. Then they turned south on the same skid road that I was on. I followed them up and down the little valleys and small ridges. I had to cross in order to get to Bedford Point Lookout. Bedford Point Lookout was abandoned years ago, and there were only concrete square pads left there where the tower had once stood. I kept walking on for about 2 miles, following these 18-inch tracks over various uphills and downhills. The area I was walking through had all been clear-cut years ago, and the skid road twisted around quite a bit. The 18-inch tracks stayed on that skid road, except for one point where the tracks left the skid road on the west side and went downhill a little, then circled a small Douglas fir tree. In about 100 feet, they came back up onto the skid road. I then followed them down a final slope where the skid road crossed another creek bottom. Just beyond that point, the forest started again, and the old skid road forked east and west. It began to snow quite heavily to where you could not see the tracks anymore. I went left, east, about 200 yards and saw nothing. It was getting quite late in the day and the light was fading. Bedford Point Lookout would have been at the top of the ridge I'd gone to, had I gone to my right, to the west. So I stopped, looked around a little bit, then turned around and slowly started back out, uphill to the top of the first small ridge to the north. It was a quarter mile up to the top of that ridge, and when I got there, I was a little tired, so I stopped to rest a few minutes. On top of that ridge, I was looking at the forest to my south, when this huge, hellacious, loud guttural scream/yell came roaring out of that timber. Louder than any other I've ever heard before or since. The scream came out of a tight draw that was heavily timbered. I was looking directly at that draw. I took a compass bearing on where I believed the sound came from, noted the date and time, and turned back towards my truck. I said to myself, another day. I never stepped into any of those 18-inch tracks. I could only imagine how many there actually were that I'd seen that day, over 2 miles of tracking. The tracks were 6 feet apart going uphill and 7 feet apart going downhill. And that's from the toe of one foot to the heel of the next one in front. Ouch. 2 weeks later, I wanted to finish my hike and I went back into that area. The same way again, the snow was all gone. Skid Road was muddy, but there were no tracks in the mud that I could see. Again armed with a rifle and a day pack. I then went to the fork in the Skid Road and went to the right where the road started to go uphill to the lookout. The Skid Road made a few twists and turns left and right, and across another creek bottom coming out of a small canyon to my left. Just beyond that creek on my right was a large, quite tall elderberry bush that had been badly torn up. I stopped and looked in there, and there in front of me were numerous 18-inch, 5-toed tracks in the mud all around the elderberry bush. I took the rifle off my shoulder and the day pack too. I set the rifle on top of the day pack and got my camera out. Just when I started to take pictures, I heard branches breaking behind me 50 feet away. There was a huge old-growth cedar tree there that I passed. I set the camera down, quickly picked up the loaded rifle, and turned with its muzzle pointing toward the tree. There were more branches moving, but they were high up in the old-growth tree. Then the branch movement began to come down the tree at a rapid pace. That would suck. When the last large limb moved, out fell a Sasquatch. Fell? Reddish/brown/black in color, 8 feet tall, less than 50 feet away. It was facing me as it came down out of the cedar tree. As soon as it hit the ground, it immediately turned away from me, showing its back and running off in the heavy timber. My view of it then was blocked by the size of the cedar tree and brush. I sat there by the elderberry bush for about a half an hour, just listening to noises and sounds that were coming from the direction where it had gone. I was halfway up to Bedford Point Lookout. I'd been there before many times in the years past. After waiting for a while, I left again. A few months later, warmer weather had set in, and I went back a third time into that same area. That time, I finally made it up to the lookout. At the junction where the old skid road and the access road from the lookout tower came together, there were a series of small mud puddles. In those puddles were small, half-eaten rainbow trout. Every pool had 2 or 3 half-eaten fish. At the top of the lookout tower access road, by the concrete pads, there was nothing that indicated on the ground that any kind of activity or disturbance had taken place. A few tree limbs and branches overhead, 8 to 10 feet off the ground, were broken at 90 degrees, and they looked like fresh breaks, but nothing else. However, there was this bad feeling of not being alone. I can't describe it, you'll just have to feel it for yourself. I was well armed, so I wasn't too worried. After looking around a bit more, I turned around and left again. 10 years later, I'd taken a hiking friend into the Bedford Point Lookout area. We were on the east side of that area, 1 mile away from the Bedford Point Lookout. I stopped the rig on a small guardrailed bridge over a nice creek. My friend wanted to try and fish, so off west and slightly downhill we went, a couple hundred yards away. I stayed by the rig and sat on the guardrail just watching him drown worms. Sorry, let me read that smoothly. I stayed by the rig and sat on the guardrail just watching him drown worms. As I was sitting there from behind me, out from Mount Hood National Forest at my back came a loud knock. I turned slowly and looked but saw nothing. As long as I sat there watching my friend fish, there was noise in the brush behind me. Not loud, but real close. I tried to get my friend's attention, but the creek was making too much noise, and he never looked my way. When my friend finished fishing, we left. I've been back there a few more times over the years into other close parts to that area. At one other location, I was walking up another very old inclined skid road when a Sasquatch, 7 feet tall, stepped out of the brush and timber, 15 feet directly in front of me. He stood there for a second or two staring at me, then got down on all threes, not fours, and crab-like scuttled across the skid road in front of me, from one side to the other. It held one arm across its face, just as a football player would when blocking. Then it reached the timber on the other side of the road. It stood up and glanced back at me, then went off at a fast pace into the timber. Holy shit, that must have been creepy. Can't get away from that tripod. Little bugger. Well, the shit has just showed up. That would have been absolutely messed up to watch that. Over the years, I've been back in that area many times at various locations. I have seen a number of them. One last additional time, I took my wife up to an area where there are many small lakes and a few creek bottoms. My wife and I were hunting in the fall when we had a Sasquatch walk beside us in the timber less than 20 feet away. You could see its massive, reddish, brown, hairy legs, but nothing else. The vine maple that we were in is 5 to 6 feet tall. When you walked, it walked. When you stopped, it would take one more additional half step and then stop. It finally veered off into the timber away from us. At the end of that old skid road, there was a rock ledge overlooking a large canyon. When we got to the end of the skid road, there before us was an impression of a huge ass print, both cheeks in the pine needle duff and grass. And it was 3 feet to 3.5 feet long, 2 feet wide, and 2 feet deep. It looked like it sat there with its legs over the rock face edge. Right in front of the ass print were also 2 very deep heel impressions where it must have heard us coming and dug them into the ground when it stood up. The heel impressions were at least 5 inches to maybe 6 inches wide and dug into the ground a couple of inches, and the dirt was fresh. I'd like it if you would not give out my name or email address. I'm 73 years old, retired, and would like to be left alone. I've always wanted to put a compilation of my encounters and personal stories together based on my 40-plus years experiences of looking for these creatures. I took quite a lot of field notes. I still go out and look with my wife and friend. I'm still finding them deep in the woods and high up in the Cascade Mountains. I've even had 2 of them talk their gibberish back and forth in front of me at 3 a.m. in the morning one time. I was hunting in the fall and it was 3rd week of deer season in a snowy October. We always take apples and leave them gifts of apples. If you do this every time you go out looking, they will come to know you as someone who means them no harm. I always take a rifle and a day pack with whatever I might need. Should I have to stay out a night or two? I carry a rifle because of cougars and bears, not Sasquatch. I think that to shoot one of these creatures would not be in your best interest. Absolutely agree. Excuse me. I found over the years that they always run in pairs, and I've personally experienced just this scenario many, many times. I believe their DNA is 95% human and 5% unknown. Someday, we might finally come to know exactly what roams around in our forests. I think when that happens, man will come to know that he is not the top predator in the forest. Take care. Thanks. Blank, your name. What a very well read and experiences account sent in. You imagine trying to make that one up, right? Like this generous person who just bravely shared all this with us. Imagine picturing being the person that would potentially almost maybe think that one up and type it out. Good luck, right? Good luck. Well, that was an incredible, generous share with all of us. Absolutely appreciate you and what you just sent in, and I absolutely don't blame you for wanting to be anonymous. Who needs a bunch of frickin' misfits harassing the shit out of you to go out and run around the woods, set up trail cameras and bang and whoop in the night, right? Bang on trees and whoop in the night. Maybe even put on a night vision camera focused on their own face while they walk around the forest. Sorry, but that one's always just made me laugh my frickin' head off. But anyway, getting back to getting back to this email. That's a very well written shared accounts. It's like I said, it's amazing how people react, right? Your average person after seeing that thing come out of the tree would probably never go in the woods again. However, you kept going back to the exact same place for years, had numerous experiences, and take note, you came out of it unscathed. What an interesting life you have led. Interesting to see some of those photos. Well, whatever. If you wanted to share the photos of the prints you took with the people, I'm sure they would be dying to see them. Maybe if you felt like emailing those back in one day, we'll post them up for the people to see, those who are curious and want to see. And I wonder how many more people are familiar with that exact area that you were. Probably a handful anyway, right? Pretty amazing. What an amazing thing to have had so many experiences, right? And be so casual about it and accepting and curious. But anyway, I gotta go. The big boss is at the other end of the property waving at me. I gotta go. I gotta get my button gear, and I will be back shortly. And some important phone calls are going to be made today, and hopefully some interviews recorded to share with all useful knowledge.